Hello and welcome to day 2 of International Product Safety Week. A big hello in particular to anyone who wasn't with us yesterday and is joining us for the first time. We're coming to you from Brussels, but we welcome you wherever you are in the world. And yesterday we had people from Malaysia, from Peru, from Australia, from really, and obviously all over Europe. So we've really got a big geographical spread. My name is Cathy Smith and I'm going to be your moderator today, asking questions, introducing the speakers. Just a reminder that you can send questions during the sessions via Slido, which is to the right of your screen. Now, I think a couple of people, or some people, had a little problem with Slido yesterday. So if you need to go on Slido separate to the platform, the code is #IPSW2020. So it's IPSW2020 if you're having any problems with Slido, because we want you to ask questions, but we will also be asking you questions via Slido. And of course, we want you to tweet, you want to get the conversation going on out there. The hashtags you'll see are behind me, but it's #IPSW2020, EU for consumers, or product safety. So we had a very active Twitter sphere yesterday. Let's keep that going. And just to ask if the questions on Slido, if you can keep them concise and not put too many general comments in chat. That's just to help me really, because it's quite difficult to sift through and see where the questions are. Now, I hope you managed to use the networking yesterday. We have special networking slots booked for you, which are right after the event. So if you want to exchange ideas with another participant, then that's the time to do it. Basically, you can request a one-to-one meeting and you just browse through the participants tab and you send a request to somebody that you want to talk to. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to spend the sessions today talking about how to effectively and efficiently recall dangerous products, a big, big subject. We know that faulty products can be a ticking time bomb in the hands of a consumer. So we want to discuss what works best when it comes to recalling dangerous items as quickly as possible. And we're going to hear some best case scenarios from all over the globe. So that is really fascinating to see how different countries are doing this. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to introduce Oshi Soba, who is Deputy Head of Product Safety Unit at the European Commission, who is going to be my expert, my sidekick. Oshi, it's great to see you. I mean, you are living and breathing and sleeping product safety. And so this is, you know, this issue is a big issue, isn't it? The whole thing of efficient recalls.
Yeah, absolutely, Cathy. And I have been working on a product safety field for 10 years. And well, actually, I've been looking at, this is, I think, the 4th product safety week that my colleagues and me organized together. So I'm extremely happy to be here and welcome everybody for the session today. And I'm really looking forward to this session because, as you said, it's very, very important. We don't want to have dangerous products remaining in the hands of consumers. So we have to make product recalls as efficient as possible. And when we talk about these consumers, we talk about children, we talk about vulnerable consumers. So it is extremely important for us. And wanted to also tell you a few other things. We had really great sessions yesterday, and I think we're going to have very, very exciting sessions today. And yesterday we had Commissioner Reynders talking to us, and I'm very happy to announce that today we will have Salla Sastamoinen, who is our Acting Director General, joining us today. Welcome, Salla. And Cathy, before I hand over to you, can I share with you some registration numbers for today?
Oh yeah, no, do, because it's fascinating to know how many people are watching.
So today we have 500 participants registered, and we have registered participants from 70 countries. So we're, again, super international.
Oh, that's really great. No, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much. And Oshi will be popping up from time to time to give us some thoughts and insight. But as you were saying there, we're delighted to have with us Salla Sastamoinen, who is the Acting Director General at DG Justice and Consumers. She's our real host today and our keynote speaker. So delighted to hear from you, Salla.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody also from my side. So greetings from here from Brussels around the world. I heard that how many you are who are interested today about the product safety. So welcome to this second second session that we are dedicating to maximizing the effectiveness of the product recalls, as our moderator already mentioned. I'm happy to open it, and we will have an exciting then afternoon ahead us with experts in the panels giving the best knowledge on the matter. Indeed, dangerous products. We try to get them out of the market, but they still end up to the hands of consumers sometime. We hear news, we read the news about the fires caused by the faulty electrical appliances or on children who are injured by defective products. Sometimes tragic events. What we think that these events should be avoided and could be avoided. Under the European Union's General Product Safety Directive, economic operators are obliged to take immediate corrective measures if a product that they have placed on the market is dangerous. This may require recalling the products that are already with the consumers. In addition, the member states, the union member states, market surveillance authorities have the power to order corrective actions or they can take actions themselves if measures taken by these economic operators are not sufficient. The national authorities need to communicate immediately all the measures that they have taken against the dangerous products through the EU Rapid Alert System, RAPEX system. This is a system that we are operating in the Commission in DG Justice and Consumers, and that helps that the information circulates quickly across the EU. The Commission, we are also informing the general public about the dangerous products through the SafetyGate public website. It is over 2,000 dangerous products per year that the member states are notifying in the RAPEX system, in this rapid alert system. Around half of these concern dangerous products that have been supplied to consumers. We need to prevent harm thus. And in order to prevent harm, it's crucial that these products are removed from consumers' homes as quickly and efficiently as possible. Making recalls more effective is therefore a clear priority for us. Earlier this year, we launched a large-scale behavioral study to see how recalls could be better communicated to the consumers and better organized. The first results show that a lot more can be done to make recalls more visible, more transparent, and less burdensome for the consumers. My colleagues will give you a sneak peek into the key findings in a few minutes. As Commissioner Reynders said yesterday, we are also preparing a proposal for the revision of the General Product Safety Directive. Strengthening provisions on recalls is one of the areas that we are looking into. In addition, we are working with the national market surveillance authorities in developing the EU guidance to direct both the businesses and authorities through the recall process. But improving recall effectiveness is not only a European issue, it is a global challenge, given that increasingly global product supply chains and the growth of the online shopping. Indeed, global answers are a must to maximize our product safety efforts. We will hear later today about the recent OECD policy guidance on the product recalls, and we are very happy to take part in its development. We will also hear today about the various initiatives taken by national regulators, businesses and consumer representatives all around the world, and what they do to make recalls more effective. I hope that these excellent examples will serve as an inspiration to all of us. So it is together that we must work. It is together that we are then able to better protect the consumers. I wish you all a very fruitful discussions today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Sala. That's fantastic. And as you say, product safety is a global challenge, which brings us on to this first panel, because we've got regulators joining us for the first panel who are going to be talking about international efforts to make recalls more effective, because the number of product recalls is growing steadily, actually, and has been in recent years. I suppose it's more complex supply chains, lots of factors at play, but increasing the effectiveness of product recalls is a real priority for regulators in countries around the world. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work, and a large proportion of recalled items are still in people's homes. So how do we get the message across? And we're going to hear some really good examples of research and policy initiatives which can maximise recall effectiveness, and it's just a good opportunity for people to exchange ideas. So if you have got any questions throughout the session, please send your questions on Slido, and then we will, in fact, have a Q&A session later on. Let me introduce our panellists to you. We've got Neville Matthew, who is from Australia, wearing two hats from the Competition and Consumer Commission and also chair of the OECD Working Party on Consumer Product Safety. We have Anna Janssen, who is from the European Commission. She's a policy officer in product safety at DG Justice and Consumers. Matthew Verlemans, who is head of section product supervision at the Norwegian Environment Agency, and Rasmus Weber, who is from the German Federal Motor Transport Authority. So we've got a really nice spread. Let's start with Neville at the OECD. And as we just heard there from Sala, that the OECD has just issued a policy guidance, a set of recommendations on all aspects of recall processes, which is for governments and other stakeholders to really give some guidance. So Neville, tell us more about it. Give us a bit of insight into what your guidelines are all about.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here to speak. Are the slides being operated at your end or this end?
We can do them here if that's easier for you.
I think that would be best. Thank you.
Okay.
So, as I said, I'm delighted to present an overview of the OECD's work on product recall effectiveness. And I'll just wait for the first slide to come up. My apologies. And there we are. So hopefully people will be able to see on this slide that it's recall notifications from 2012 to 2019 on the OECD Global Recalls portal. And while I don't have the numbers for 2020 yet, this slide reveals that global recalls seem to be trending up, as indicated by the Acting Director General in her presentation, in her opening remarks. This is also the case in my own country, Australia. I think that this means that recalls are becoming a more important issue to regulators, businesses and consumers. Next slide, please. So while assessment methods may vary from country to country, the general consensus is that consumer response rates to recalls continue to remain low. And with some product categories, this is as low as 5%. And while return rates have been used in many countries to judge recall performance, OECD research indicates that while simple, just looking at the return rate is not enough. How a recall performs depends on a number of factors, including those on this slide. How easily can the product be tracked? The product's lifespan and price. When lifespan is short and price is low, the consumer may no longer have the product, and if they do, it might no longer be in use. What consumers understand, how they perceive risk, and how easy is it for them to participate in the recall. All these things affect the effectiveness of the recall. The two publications on this slide provide details of the findings from a 2018 workshop and also from initial research conducted by the OECD, which included surveying regulators from around the world about their processes and practices. Next slide, please. The OECD has previously done extensive work on behavioural insights in other policy areas. Certain behavioural biases can be used to explain consumer behaviour in recalls. On this slide, we have some of those behavioural biases. Information overload. This is something consumers are dealing with all the time in our modern world. More recalls and more public health and safety warnings can fatigue consumers and lead them to ignore even the recalls that apply to them. How a message is framed can also play a huge role. On the Global Recalls portal, we identified many recall notices that were lengthy, verbose, and had jargon. Consumers are less likely to respond to these recalls if the potential hazards are not clear or if the risk is in any way downplayed. Biases such as inertia and the endowment effect. Essentially, as humans, we like the status quo, especially if choices are complex, or if we're being asked to return or dispose of a recall item that we actually like using and hasn't personally caused us any issues, we may choose not to choose. So consumers can also make choices that are inconsistent across the time periods. We have the conflict between short-term urges and long-term interests. So if the product is useful and the risk not immediate, consumers may ignore a recall message and over-optimistically think it won't happen to me. Next slide, please. Thank you. To address these issues, the OECD has developed a series of related policy guidance documents. In July this year, the OECD Council accepted and released a new recommendation on consumer product safety. Better practices on recalls featured throughout the recommendation. The word recall is used 36 times. The recommendation will be supported by a companion document, which we hope to finalise soon. The companion document has further detail and will enable consistent implementation of the recommendation. But the centrepiece of our work, which has been finalised just last month, is the long-awaited policy guidance on product recall effectiveness. On the screen, you will see 5 focus areas. Recall effectiveness, identifying and managing recalls, strengthening global and multi-stakeholder collaboration, improving communication with consumers, and enhancing business awareness. As you can see, the guidance has recommendations for both governments and businesses, and it's been developed in collaboration globally with agents, government agencies, consumer organisations, and businesses. A list of the documents I've mentioned today, and hopefully that slide will help people find them in the future. And the final slide is just some contact details for myself and Brigitte Kocher from the OECD Policy Unit, and we'd be delighted to hear from you if there are any questions after today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Neville. Thank you. Yeah, information overload and jargon. I guess we're going to hear quite a lot about that in the session this afternoon. I mean, obviously the OECD then is taking a global approach. So Neville, I mean, this to you is what matters. It shouldn't be done just at national level. There has to be a global international approach.
I very much believe there needs to be a global approach. Firstly, the fact that an unsafe good has ended up with consumers mean that our policy frameworks and laws have not worked as intended. Also, it means that the pre-market product stewardship we expect from companies, manufacturers and importers has not worked as intended. This leaves product safety recalls as the last line of defence to protect consumers. If that last line of defence is not effective, consumers can be injured or killed, and sadly this happens. And as noted in the introduction by the Acting Director General, we live in a global market, we have global products, we need global policy settings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, let's have a look at what's happening at EU level, the latest insights on recall effectiveness within the EU. Anna Yassam is from the European Commission. A very interesting study that's been carried out, a behavioural study on customer experiences of product recalls. I mean, Neville was already referring to some of those sort of elements, and this is a study that's been done at EU level. So, Anna, tell us more about it.
Yes, thank you very much, Kathy. Hello, everyone. So indeed, I'm delighted to give you today a glimpse into the first results of this study. To our knowledge, it's the most comprehensive study into the issue so far, so we're really quite excited about it. We're looking at recalls from the perspective of consumers here. So we're particularly interested in how recall communication and procedure can be improved to increase consumer response rates. And we're also interested in how to facilitate direct consumer contact in case of safety issues, in particular by increasing product registration rates. We know that in many instances, people are simply not aware that they own a recalled product. So if we could start with the presentation, please, and go directly to the second slide, you can see that we have used several different data collection methods here. both quantitative and qualitative. The main part consisted of 2 online experiments accompanied by a consumer survey, but we also carried out consumer focus groups for some more exploratory discussion. We mapped existing recall announcements and registration schemes based on online desk research. We had an industry survey to get some information that's not publicly available directly from companies. We had a series of stakeholder interviews, so really a wide variety of sources. And by the way, many thanks to those of you who participated in the industry survey and in the interviews and shared your insights with us. That's really greatly appreciated. Okay, next slide. So what have we found out? As Neville has just said, recall effectiveness depends on a number of external factors which are hard to control. We know, for instance, that recalls tend to be more effective if the product was bought online, simply because it's easier to contact the buyers. We also know that the type of product matters. So we'll hear in a moment from the German Motor Transport Authority, which is able to achieve 100% success rates in automotive recalls. Of course, these rates are much lower for cheaper products and when it's not possible to identify the affected consumers. And finally, we know that consumers' socio-demographic characteristics also play a role. But what's important, I think, is that recall effectiveness also depends on internal factors that actually can be improved. The content and channel of recall notification, the timing, of course, the timing of recall campaign is key, but we've also found that the timing of product registration is important. Finally, the procedure that consumers need to follow, whether to return a recalled product or to register a product to be informed of possible recalls in the future, also play a role. So let's now have a look at some of the examples. In focus groups, we showed the participants a number of fictitious recall notices, and you can see 2 of them here. As you will probably guess, the notice on the left was the least preferred one. Participants felt that it was hard to read, and also they felt that the word voluntary in the heading is confusing, whereas the notice on the right was seen as much better. Participants liked the simple layout with short paragraphs, and they also liked the inclusion of product picture. So you can see one participant commented, when I see the picture, I immediately see, oh, it's my washing machine, so I actually better read the text. Next slide. Secondly, the study has shown the key importance of using direct communication whenever it's possible. In the online experiments, so here you can see the screenshots from the online experiments, when respondents were doing a distraction task, they were asked to reply to a number of questions about the products that they were assigned in the experiment. They were shown either a direct email notification about a recall to the right, or a generic recall announcement, which you can see on the left. And we saw that people were more likely to click on the email notification than on the banner ad. Next slide. But even more strikingly, those who opened the full announcements were over twice more likely to act on a direct notification than on a generic recall announcement, even though the description of the risk, action to take and remedy were just the same. So that's quite a powerful finding, we think. Next slide. A third finding I wanted to highlight has to do with the timing of product registration. In the online experiment, considerably more respondents clicked on the invitation to register a product when they saw it at the checkout on the left, than when they saw it after completing a purchase, either as part of the packaging, that's the middle option, or as a general registration campaign, that's the option to the right. Next slide. We also see that registration rates could be increased by reducing the effort required to complete the registration form. So when the product information was pre-filled, 87% of respondents completed the registration. That would mimic, for instance, QR code scanning. But this went down to 63 when people needed to fill in the information themselves. Next slide. So these were really just a couple of teasers. As Sala mentioned, in parallel to this study, we're running a coordinated activity with national market surveillance authorities, which focuses mainly on the roles and responsibilities of different actors in the recall process. Norwegian Environmental Agency, from whom we'll hear just now, is one of the participants in this activity. And the two processes really complement each other, and both will provide input to the proposal for the revision of the General Product Safety Directive planned for next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. So I bet you had fun making those fictitious recall notices. Let me just ask you, you mentioned something about socio-demographic differences in response to recalls. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, thanks. Indeed, as I was only assigned 5 minutes for my initial intervention, I didn't mention that this study is in fact not our first piece of research into recall effectiveness. 2 years ago, we carried out a first EU-wide survey into the issue, and there we did a multivariate analysis to really analyze the impact of socioeconomic status in the recall process. And what we've seen is that consumers with lower socioeconomic status are also more vulnerable in the recall process. Now, for this study, we're roughly halfway, 2/3, I would say, through. So we still need to run some more in-depth analysis, but actually the emerging picture confirms this pattern. So what we see, for instance, is that younger respondents, those with lower education, those who are unemployed, are less likely to take action in response to recalls, and they're also less likely to register their products. I understand that that's consistent also with findings from other jurisdictions like Australia. One other interesting thing that we found in this study is that, except for age and sociodemographics, also some other characteristics play a role. For instance, the importance assigned to product safety, which shows that in our communication campaigns, it's really important to identify different consumer profiles and target the message accordingly.
Thank you very much indeed. A really interesting survey and study that you've been doing. And already lots of mentions about what should be on a recall notice, and obviously simplicity comes through, and pictures and direct channels really important. We're going to talk now about communicating recalls to consumers, because Norway, as Anna was mentioning, is one of the few EU European Economic Area countries, because Norway is not actually in the EU, but to have issued guidelines on how to carry out a recall. So what sort of elements should be included, and what consumers' rights need to be included in there? So Mathieu Verlemans is the head of section at product supervision of the Norwegian Environment Agency, and he's going to tell us a bit more about what's happening in Norway. Hello to you,
Hi.
Mathieu.
Hello. Is it possible to get the presentation?
I think so. I think we can find your slides here somewhere.
Thank you.
There we go.
Well, thank you. The Norwegian Environment Agency controls all kinds of products against the European chemical legislations. Next slide, please. And then in Norway, we have, which means that sometimes we need to require companies to recall products from consumer. And in Norway, we have the Product Control Act, which is our GPSD in Norway, which we had since 1976. And in this piece of legislation, which also implement the GPSD in Norway, we have two important obligations. The first one is, of course, that economic operators should not put any non-compliant and dangerous products on the market. But they also have an obligation to notify to us when they do place on the market non-compliant products and dangerous products. Next slide, please. And to help them to understand the scope of the obligation, we have issued guidelines based on that legislation. And these guidelines, it says how a recall should be carried out. It should be, the guideline says that you need to use different channels. Of course, individual communication is working best, so you have to use it. But you should also use poster in shops. You also use to need information, to publish information on the website, on your website, and also to use media. The guidelines also states that the communication you need to, the economic operators need to use, it should be short. It should be, you should need to describe the risk. You should have signs, which is a danger. You need to, of course, have a picture of the product. You need to have a clear description of the risk and states exactly what the consumers have to do regarding the recall. And these guidelines we promoted every time we are carrying out inspections, and also when we require economic operators to do recall. So it is explained how a recall should be carried out. Should and not shall, but it is helpful for companies to have a framework to work with. Next slide, please. And then, like you said, Norway, we are part of the European Economic Agreement, and we are not part of the European Union, which means that we often used to say in Norway, we are both inside the EU and outside the EU. So sometimes you need to translate things that are done at the European level to Norwegian consumers to appeal to them. And one thing that has been done is that our RAPEX contact point in Norway is the Directorate for Civil Protection, and they have designed a platform called dangerousproducts.no in Norwegian, Farlige Produkter. It's what you see on the screen now, and it's a database where all the dangerous products which have been recalled on the Norwegian market are listed and described. It's quite user-friendly. You can search after different categories. You see a picture. You will see a quite description of the risk, where it has been sold, and you can also, if you're a consumer and say one of these products still in shop, you can report it in by using this website. Next slide, please. And also, if you're a consumer, a Norwegian consumer, and you have a product at home, and you have the product is dangerous, and you see that, or you think that the product is dangerous, you can register that product in this website, and the information would be sent out to all the relevant market surveillance authorities in Norway, so we can follow up on that. And then companies can also, of course, register their own dangerous products in this website. And you can also get alerts from this website. So every time a new product is based, you can get an alert on that based on which criteria you want to have, which product criteria you want to have information about. So it's a one-stop shop. And the platform it has not yet been fully marketed in Norwegian market because we need to get all the relevant market surveillance authorities behind the project. But it is in a way, a manner for us to cut the distance between the Norwegian consumers and the safety gate. But this database should, in the future, be related, linked to the European database, of course, because the problem is global. Next slide, please. And we still think that it's important also, in addition to individual communication to consumer, to go public and use the media as much as we can. First, to market also our own work as a market surveillance authority, to say that we are active, we are controlling product, and we are requiring economic operators to recall products. And also, it's important to have to enhance consumer exposure to recalls. The consumers have a right to have safe products, but they need to be aware that sometimes there are dangerous products on the market, and they can be exposed to the recall, and then they have to act on that. Thank you very much.
Ask you a question after your presentation. Oshi,
Yes.
What did you want to say?
No, but please.
I don't know.
Yes,
If,
I wanted to thank you so much for the presentation. It was extremely interesting. And I also wanted to thank for the active participation in our work on recall effectiveness that the European Commission is coordinating. Your input is absolutely vital. So thank you very much, first of all, for that. What I wanted to ask is, as Anna mentioned, it's very difficult to reach vulnerable consumers. And I wanted to ask you that, does Norway have experience in reaching out to consumer groups that are more difficult to reach? For example, people who are less internet savvy or people speaking different languages.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question you raise, and it's a complicated one. I mean that to ensure recall effectiveness also to vulnerable consumer, we need to do more of the things that are working well, and also to do things a bit differently. It was said that direct communication is really important. It should be individual. If possible, it should be personalized. Hi, Matthew, you have a dangerous product in your home. And it should be repeated, because we live in an information society when we drown with information, so it should be repeated several times so that it can be catched by the consumer. And also, as well, we live more in a society with there's less text. There is more pictures, more film, and I think if we use that more, it would also help to increase recall effectiveness towards vulnerable consumer. And a last point, I think it's Matthew Neville who mentioned an endowment effect. When you have a product, you have a really strong ownership to your product. And I think recall effectiveness is also about psychology, how you talk to consumer. And we know that people, they have loss aversion. They don't like to lose something. So the communication should be framed in a way that if you don't deliver the product, but you will lose something. And that it's not a perfect recipe to reach vulnerable consumer, but there might be some aspects there that it should be possible to work on. And I have to say also our guidelines could be more precise on that, and we would try to adapt our guidelines to also encompass this complicated aspect of recall.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you. There's a question actually, Matthew, from a member of the audience here saying, do many consumers report to you about recall products that are still in shops? And they say that this looks like an interesting enforcement feature that you're talking about, and you wonder, but they wonder how efficient it is.
I asked the Orapex contact point, which is behind the platform, if it happens, and they say sometimes it happens, which is sometimes leads to be a bit confusion, because sometimes it's a batch which have been recalled, and there might be a new kind of products on the market. But we still think that it's really powerful for consumer to be able to give us that information, because we can do sometime random control to ensure that the recall is perfectly carried out by the economic operators, but it takes time. So it's good for us to have information from consumer, and also, not least, for that economic operators know that consumer can report to us on that.
Absolutely interesting. Well, thank you very much indeed. We're now going to move on to the car sector, really interesting sector, because it's unique really in two ways. The motor vehicles represent around half of all product recalls, but of course cars are registered. So it's the only sector where it's actually possible to identify and contact virtually all customers. So we're delighted to hear from Rasmus Weber, who is with the German Federal Motor Transport Authority, and they've really got a number of practices in place to make recalls very, very effective. As I think we heard from Anna, 100% effective. You can't get better than that, Rasmus.
Delighted to be here. Could I have my presentation?
Yes. I say yes. I'm doing nothing here. Somebody else is doing it for you.
Okay. I'm going to start my presentation for recall effectiveness in the motor vehicle sector with a question for you. How can you manage a recall of a dangerous product in a way that every consumer is informed of the recall? Or in other words, how can you reach a fulfillment rate of 100%? I would like to give an answer to this question by explaining how recall is managed by the German Federal Motor Transport Authority. In Germany, it's called Kraftfahrtbundesamt KBA. Next slide, please. The task to increase recall effectiveness in the motor vehicle sector is, in the first step, to identify defects that can present a serious risk to health or environment. KBA receives information through several ways. This can be the manufacturer of the vehicle in question, but also vehicle users, public attorneys, insurance companies, police, press, and also very important, I guess it has been mentioned earlier today, RAPEX or even ICSMS notifications. As for the second step, we evaluate the level of risk and necessary countermeasures. This is done by close communication with the manufacturer, affected authorities, and even affected vehicle owners, especially if the original information about the defect was received in this way. The third step then is to monitor and supervise the execution of countermeasures. Our goal is to eliminate 100% of all serious risk defects on registered vehicles. Next slide, please. To do this, the KBA runs something we call the Central Vehicle Register, CVR. It combines the individual vehicle identification number with the vehicle user information like his name and the address. The use of the CVR is limited by data protection law. We can make use of the register for recalls if the defect has a significant effect on road safety or environment. When a recall is started, we simply run the worldwide VIN list against the Central Vehicle Register to get a list of names and addresses to reach affected users directly with recall letters. The manufacturers then have the choice of either sending those letters to affected customers themselves or using a mail service offered by KBA. Car owners often respond better to a letter from the authority, but this can also be very useful in the case of very small manufacturers who sometimes do not possess the technical possibilities to do so. Next slide, please. The first two steps, identification and evaluation, I already described. The last step is to monitor and supervise the execution of those countermeasures. A typical supervised recall by KBA could look like this. In the first step of every recall, every affected user gets a letter which says, hey, there's a recall for your vehicle, get it fixed. After which we could have a fulfillment rate, for example, of 76%. Obviously, this isn't our goal yet. Therefore, we would do the first follow-up, in which the vehicle user would get another letter. This could result in something like 90%, which differs from case to case. After the vehicle user gets the third letter which says, hey, you still haven't get your car fixed, get it done, otherwise your car's registration might be taken away. After this letter, we end up with about 99% fulfillment. Finally, we inform the local registration authorities about each remaining car to check for the registration withdrawal of the car. This ensures that risk is eliminated. Next slide, please. This graph shows the development in recalls very well. In blue, you can see the number of recalls we did between 2013 and 2019 with the CVR. You can clearly see that the numbers are rising. The gray line represents the number of recalled vehicles, which today in general is much higher than 10 years ago. Note that the number of recalls is rising while the number of recalled vehicles is a bit more lively. This is due to a very small number of cases with a very big number of affected vehicles. A good example, therefore, could be Jakarta airbags. Next slide, please. Experiences in member states and also for our voluntary recalls show that the effectiveness on a recall can be significantly increased even without the threat of the registration being withdrawn. Open communication and repeated contact via mail or phone explaining why the recall is necessary show great results. Also, the possibility for vehicle owners to check on manufacturer's homepage for recalls concerning their cars using the vehicle identification number and public and media work bring more transparency in the progress and help to increase the effectiveness. With the CVR and the possible withdrawal of the vehicle registration, a maximum performance rate of 100% can be achieved today. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting. But so have you ever used the sanctions? And you say it's 100% effective. Have you actually withdrawn anybody's car registration?
I attached some sort of diagram to this presentation, I guess. Could I have that?
Do we have another, is there another diagram or another slide on the presentation?
It should be.
We're looking for it.
You can see we use the possibility of the registration withdrawal quite a lot. In 2018, for instance, this was done for almost 150,000 vehicles. But that depends on your point of view. You could also argue that the number is quite low because we started with millions of vehicles.
And do you see the potential for in other sectors for something similar? Because as we say, the car industry is unique in the sense that it's so carefully registered. Do you see this sort of idea being possible in other sectors?
If you have the possibility to register the product you're talking about, possibly.
Well, I mean, obviously the whole thing of registering is something we're going to talk about. So thank you very, very much. Really interesting. So we've got some great ideas and thoughts now. I want to ask the panelists just some general questions, and we will get to some of the questions that are coming in from you. And also I want to ask you some questions on Slido. I just want to ask the panelists this business about the fact that obviously still a lot of people do not know when a product has been recalled. So what are the best channels to use to actually reach consumers? What do you think? I mean, Neville, what would you say from Australia's your perspective there?
Thanks very much for the question. I mean, it very much depends on the different types and groups of people. Without being creating stereotypes, a lot of older Australians still prefer print media. A lot of younger Australians would prefer social media. So I think this is one of our challenges. There's different audiences and they rely on different channels and different styles of receiving their information. So I think suppliers who are serious about conducting a good recall will use all the channels that they use to sell the product in the first place to get the message out there. Thank you.
And Anna, what would you say at EU level?
Well, I will first of all repeat my mantra. So make use of direct communication whenever it's an option. We've seen in our study that it's dramatically more effective than blanket advertising campaigns. And actually these research findings are also corroborated by hard recall monitoring data, for instance, from the US Consumer Product Safety Commission. And I absolutely agree with what Neville has just said, that for indirect communication, it's crucial to take consumer characteristics into account. We've also seen in our research that elder consumers and less internet savvy consumers prefer traditional communication channels to online channels. So an ad in a local newspaper rather than Facebook or Instagram, which may be very effective with younger consumers, for instance.
So there has to be a more sort of personalised and compartmentalised approach. Interesting. So let's talk about data, because we're getting some questions in about this, and it's really, really important. I want to ask on Slido, we're going to do a poll on Slido. The question is, customers' data are routinely collected by companies, we know that. That can be a registration scheme, as we've seen in the car sector, loyalty programs or online sales. So in the case of a recall, should companies be obliged to use customer data that they have at their disposal to contact affected customers directly? So they've got data, should they be obliged to use it in the interests of safety and a recall? Just if you'd like to go onto your Slido poll now, and you can strongly agree, tend to disagree, or strongly disagree. And I will obviously be asking our panel the same question. While everybody's looking at the Slido, let me just open it on my. We strongly agree is coming up at the moment. Orsi, can I just bring you in on this from the European Commission perspective? Because I know that this is something under review in the legislation, or the review of the legislation. So what's the positioning at EU level?
So we have had a very good workshop some time ago with different stakeholders, where it became very clear that in fact companies have some concerns using customer data because they don't want to infringe on the general data protection legislation. So what we are doing at the moment is really working with the member states to develop this guidance that Anna has mentioned, that would address how personal data should be handled in recalls. And this is an issue that we're also looking at during the review of the General Product Safety Directive. So we really want to make sure that consumers can be effectively addressed by companies, and especially, if they can be injured or their life are in danger. So that's very important for us.
Thank you. So the Slido, 62% strongly agree that companies should be obliged to use customer data, 30% tend to agree, and then 7% and 1% tend to disagree or strongly disagree. So it's very much that customer data, our audience thinks it should be used. What do you think, Matthew, in Norway? What's your approach to that? Should customers be obliged to use the data they have?
Yeah, I mean, for us as a market surveillance authorities, it's we have a hectic day-to-day business, and if the obligations is clearly stated in the legislation, it's always an advantage for us to enforce that legislation. And in Norway, there's a lot of people registered to loyalty program, and it is described in our guidelines that you should try to reach out to the consumer by individual communication, which by using the data you have, including loyalty data. So we will of course favor that from our point of view.
But when Orsi was saying some companies are worried about using data, and then of course some customers, Marco Dattola has sent us a question, says, do customers feel their information might be captured for marketing rather than safety purposes? So when we're talking about actually giving data and information away as a customer, some people are worried that it's going to be used in another way. Do you think that is an issue? Maybe I could bring Neville back in.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think this the way that we look at this in Australia is if a supplier has a loyalty program and they have data and they've been marketing to those customers, we expect them to use that channel for recall purposes, and we talk to them about it all the time. It is, I think, a little bit difficult if a country has a legislative regime that that may make it difficult for a company to use that sort of legislation, and that's obviously a policy issue that a particular government should think about. But I think absolutely, if a product is being registered by someone, it should be really clear to consumers that it's being used for product safety purposes or marketing purposes or both, and be given a clear choice as to how their data is used.
So they need to know, they need to be given that information. So let's, I mean, we've already got a sort of sense of some of the elements that you think a recall notice should have in it, but let's get into that a little bit more. So most recall information comes in written form, so it might be in stores, press releases, on websites, that sort of thing. So what does an ideal recall notice look like in your view? Let's get some views from the panel, and I also want to ask a Slido poll. So maybe we'll open the poll at the same time and ask our audience what 3 words come to mind if you think of an ideal recall announcement. So this is a word cloud that we're asking, but what words come to mind if you think of an ideal recall announcement? But just generally, I mean, we've heard a little bit already about this from some of our panelists. Anna, you were talking about the need for simplicity and pictures, I think. What's in a recall notice, as far as you're concerned, that makes a good notice?
Well, I would say an ideal recall notice should be as attractive, as easy to understand as marketing material, really. So this means using plain language, avoiding any technical jargon. This means, as we've seen in our focus groups, replacing lengthy, continuous text with short paragraphs, bullet points. What is the recall product? What is the risk? What do I need to do? What remedy am I entitled to? Whom to contact for further details? This means using good quality pictures, so consumers can immediately determine if they own the recalled product, as well as a clear indication as to where to find the product identification numbers on the products. Most people don't really know where to look for them. And finally, it means describing the risk in a clear, transparent way. So I've mentioned that as part of the study, we analyzed existing recall campaigns. We've looked into 55 campaigns in great detail. And what we've seen is that in the majority of cases, there were some terms or expressions that actually could undermine the perception of risk. So recall notices would talk about voluntary or precautionary recall or a potential possible problem. They would say that the risk could materialize in rare cases. Or highlight that there have been no reported injuries. So that's clearly something to avoid. And I know that some jurisdictions have actually banned this type of terms and expressions that could minimize the perception of risk.
What about in Norway, Mathieu? Would you be thinking, I don't know, what's your approach to that, this whole minimising perception of risk? And are you taking a stand on that when you're giving your guidelines as to how people should actually issue a recall notice?
Yeah, there's clear text about how the risk should be presented to consumers. And it's really important, and it's really also a difficult matter because at the Norwegian Environment Agency, we control products for chemicals. But the risk can be in a way not visible for consumer. It's difficult to get, okay, what's the risk? I may got cancer, I may got allergies. It's really important to get the message across and to explain the risk in plain terms. And I think I will definitely support everything that Anna has said, especially that we need to explain to consumers exactly what they have to do all the steps they need to take in a recall, so that there's no question, there's no hesitation for the consumer to know how they should act.
And I mean, just how much pushback do you think you could or might get from companies? I mean, you know, I have visions of people sort of sitting around boardrooms in some companies and saying, how can we have the most obtuse recall notice? You know, what can we miss out? What how can we make it more complicated? I mean, is that really happening? How purposeful is it when people are not being clear in their recall notices? I mean, what would you say, Neville?
Oh, thank you. Look, we have really mixed experiences with either local companies or global companies, and it depends very much on, I think, who advises the company and what their internal capacity is. There are some companies that do recalls really, really well, and I won't name any of them, but there are some large auto manufacturers based in Europe that have a really, really strong reputation for safety and reliability, notwithstanding that they may have a number of recalls. We get a lot of pushback from certain companies, and we spend time negotiating with them. If the negotiations don't work, we will publish what they say is their characterisation of the risk, but with a note as to what we think the risk is, to make sure that clarity of message is open to consumers to understand easily. Thanks.
Orsi, thank you very much, Neville. Orsi, didn't you have a great experience, a personal experience of a rather convoluted recall note?
Yes, Kathy, I did, and I had several recall experiences, very good ones and not so good ones. And I remember particularly one for all the wrong reasons. My car was recalled 2 years ago. And I actually brought with me a quote from the letter I received. Originally, it was French, so we translated it because it was so significantly, how can I say, unclear of what it said. But I quote so that you see what it is. So it said, concerned about your satisfaction and the quality of its products, the manufacturer asked us to carry out a preventive intervention on airbags. So until now, I could follow. It was about the airbags in my car, and there was a third company involved. The issue is a risk of insufficient airtightness of the airbag cartridge, which could comprise the humidity level of the propellant gas pellets, as the speed of the chemical reaction releasing the gas and the deployment of the airbags is directly linked to the degree of humidity of the pellets. The manufacturer wishes to replace the airbag cartridges in a preventative manner in order to guarantee their perfect state of operation. Did you get it, Kathy?
Oh, absolutely. Clear as mud.
So I did not understand from this letter how urgent this issue was and what really the risks were. I was familiar with the case of airbags from work, so I knew that airbags could explode and cause serious injuries, and it actually is quite a serious matter. So I acted immediately on the recall. But I think if companies provide these messages to consumers, they will not understand. Consumers will not understand what the risks are, what to do with the product, and with messages like this, no wonder why. Some of the recalls are not successful.
No, absolutely. We've got, wow, so many words coming through, and I'm not seeing, it's not coming into a word cloud on my iPad, but the sort of words that you're associating with recall: clear, easy to act on, honesty, transparency, simple language, brevity, solution, structured, timing, automated, call to action, affected product, contact. Anyway, simple, I mean, clear, simple, direct, all the sort of things that we've been talking about. So thank you for that. Now, shall we talk about how to motivate consumers? Because we have actually heard about that, how it's you know, so many people do not respond unless it's a car, and we've got the sanctions and we know all about that, about deregistering a car. So how can we simplify the process to make the remedies more attractive? Let's I mean, in your case, Rasmus, obviously you had the ultimate sanction, but also you were helping with things like free mailing, and did that really make a difference, just to simplify things for consumers? Rasmus.
Also, for us, it's a topic to use the things mentioned earlier, like clear language. I could give you another example from our work. If you have a car and it might start a fire, you could also talk of a thermal event. And we have noticed that the fulfillment rates are much higher when you use some sort of a clear and understandable language. But also for us, we use at minimum 3 letters, and we tend to choose our words stronger. In the first letter, we might simply say, hey, there's a recall for your vehicle, get it fixed. And at the next step, we might say, hey, you still haven't got your car fixed. We might take your registration away. And that helps too.
And so let me ask some of the other panellists then, Neville, in either from OECD, whichever hat you want to wear, or Australian. I mean, where do you think that you can? How do you think you can motivate consumers to really take action?
I mean, one of the challenges of recall is there is no simple formula. I mean, every product is different, every set of every consumer is different, and even groups of consumers can be different. And the key is to understand how to motivate them individually. As a case study in Australia, it was in our last annual report. We had a product that was sold by a major home hardware chain that operates in Australia, the biggest in Australia. It was a leaf blower, and it was causing injuries. It was a 10-year-old product and very cheap, but still causing injuries, and the recall rate was very low. So we spoke to the retailer and negotiated with them fresh advertising and a range of other techniques, and we saw an increase in the response rate by consumers a couple of months after that. And we did it again, and this time we asked them to display it prominently on the website and actually offer a commercial incentive more than the value of the original product if consumers returned it. And that then also got another response. So people who, it overcomes that inertia, I like the product, it's fine, but all of a sudden I can get a better product because someone's offering me a better product, and I'm happy to trade up, but I wouldn't be happy to get rid of my product that I like. Thanks.
No, that's interesting. I mean, we were hearing before, people don't want to lose something. So, what about in Norway? What's your thoughts, Mathieu?
Our thought is that we are really, I think multiple factors is really something important. So to motivate consumer, after they have the communication, it's explain what they have to do. It's also have to remind them about the consequences of dangerous products, and that they may have dangerous products at home. So we are really in favor of using multiple factors. But if you boil it down, you can motivate consumer. If you have motivated companies to make the recall, they will find ways to motivate the consumers. But one of the difficulties that a lot of companies just make the recall, so they have checked, it's done, but they don't have goals for the recall. And if they could set themselves internal goals, okay, I want to ensure that so many consumers have responded to my recall, it would make them better off to ensure, to motivate consumer more to act on a recall.
It's interesting. So, Anna, is this something that is being looked at in EU level when we're talking about the revision of the legislation?
Yes, of course, we're analyzing all the options as well as the costs and benefits. Perhaps what I would add to Neville and Matthew said is so I absolutely agree with the importance of and power of communication. I agree with the importance of benefits, which are seen as worthwhile by consumers. What I would add is also that the process itself should be as hassle-free as possible. Nobody really has time to return a product. It should be as easy as it was to buy it in the first place. And when looking at the different recall campaigns, we did identify some best practices. So, for instance, we've seen that some companies offer picking up bulky items like washing machines from consumers' homes, or they would arrange for in-home repair. We've seen that prepaid postage was offered in few cases. That's important because consumers should not bear the cost of shipping the product or otherwise returning it to the company. Some other practices, for instance, allowing people to return the product in any shop they choose rather than the one where they bought it initially, could also minimize the hassle. And finally, accepting the return without a proof of purchase, which in most cases will be lost, especially for cheaper products.
Right. Well, let's get to some questions from the audience. Vincent Shears, many fixes can now be done remotely through software updates, and this will help recall effectiveness and can also apply to other consumer products. Is that maybe I could ask Mathieu in Norway? I mean, obviously, technology and in the IT world, there are other possibilities in recall. Does that complicate things or make things easier? Do you need new legislation to deal with that? How are you approaching?
It's a complex matter, but yes, you can do a lot now. Fix some problem by distance, by updating softwares, and it has been done in the past. So and with success. So it's not really our field of action because we work with chemicals and not really with software. But it has been done before, and it should anyway. That's the way the society is moving forward. So it should anyway be it should be allowed, or it should be make it easy to make that kind of fix, which is working.
Mm-hmm. Neville, there's a question here. It said there are different alert systems, the OECD Global Recall, the OAS network and others. Do you think it'd be possible to work on an information integration process? So,
yes, look, it is a great question, and the OECD Global Recall Portal is open to all countries, whether they're members of the OECD or not. We've actually invested in API technology, so groups or countries that wish to have their recalls uploaded to the OECD can work with us to have that done automatically in real time. So we've made that an investment, and we'd welcome having a single source of information for consumers, business and other regulators that was available and immediately up to date. Thanks.
Thank you. Somebody's asking about second-hand goods. Maybe I could ask Anna about this, because if we're talking about customer information being the best way for manufacturers to contact customers about safety, then where do we go in the world of second-hand goods? And I think, the whole second-hand market is really growing at the moment.
Indeed, that is a challenge. Even though, for instance, we've seen when analyzing registration schemes that out of the 40 schemes we analyzed, none applied any time limit for registering your product. So in theory, you could also register a product which you received secondhand or as a gift. We've also seen that some communication campaigns encouraged the word of mouth. So. And some in particular for childcare products, which are often handed over to other people or sold secondhand, also included an encouragement to notify the current owners of the recall. But indeed, that's a challenging category of products, which certainly requires additional efforts.
Well, what about the whole issue of trust? Because, you know, does the way that a company handles a recall, well, it must impact customers' trust and its reputation, and how much does that play in a manufacturer's approach to the way that they're dealing with recalls? Anna, I mean, did you look into this in your studies?
Yes, so I mentioned the first survey that we carried out 2 years ago. And there we asked consumers how their recall experience impacted their trust towards the company. And surprisingly, slightly over half consumers said that their trust in the recalling company increased as a result. In the current study, we also asked a number of follow-up questions to respondents who, in the online experiment, which you saw in the presentation, clicked on the recall notification. So we asked them, for instance, how they perceive the manufacturer's trustworthiness, whether they are likely to buy again, would be likely to buy again from this manufacturer, or recommend them to their friends. And again, in over half of instances, respondents replied yes to all of those. So I think it's an important message to spread, that contrary to what companies may fear, it looks like consumers actually reward transparency and speed of action. So the important thing is to be prepared and take action if needed.
Although, Rasmus, I think you said in the car industry example that people were more readily going to respond to a communication that came from an authority rather than an industrial player. Is that right? And so how do you think that customers to sort of see the whole trust element when it comes to a recall?
I guess you could look at it in two ways. You could say, manufacturer A has recalled 800,000 vehicles in 2017, and manufacturer B only recalled 5,000 vehicles. And you could then say vehicle A is much unsafer than vehicle B, but that's not the case.
Okay, so what maybe I can bring Neville in on the whole trust element and the reputation, to the reputational elements when it comes to recalls. How much is this playing in the minds of both consumers and companies?
I think it is a real concern for companies, and I think they underestimate what a good experience means. I mean, all their marketing people will tell them, you know, that if you have a really good experience with the company when you first meet them, how you received, how you met when you're first buying something, if that sort of behaviour is replicated through a recall, you know, obviously it's not going to be a negative experience. I mean, all they've got to get over is that there'll be a period of time where the consumer gives the product back for a repair or receives a different product. And they can do that in a way that builds trust rather than in a way that confuses consumers, makes it hard to access and frustrates them. They have a choice, and the smart companies make it easy and make it a good experience. Thanks.
Okay. So just in terms of getting people to register their products, Anna, what more can be done to get that to happen? So that, I mean, we already said that maybe some customers are concerned at the way that the information might be going to be used. What approach do you think would be effective?
Yes, so we've talked indeed about personal data concerns that also came up in Slido questions and comments, and that's something that we've also seen. So in our focus groups discussions, indeed, participants feared that their personal data would be misused and would be used to bombard them with marketing material. So I think it's really crucial to reassure consumers that their data will not be used for any other purpose than that for which it was collected. But another important point is the importance of even establishing a link between product registration and safety. Which is not really clear to consumers. So again, in focus groups discussions, people would associate registration with a warranty or after sale support, but just 1 person out of 40 thought of the link between registration and safety, which is admittedly not that surprising, because when we look at the supply side, when we look at actual registration schemes, it looks like even those companies which envisage using registration data for safety purposes in their privacy notices would not say it upfront in their invitation to register. So clearly there's a scope to make this link more prominent. And of course, as I mentioned in my presentation, reducing the effort to register. So demand as little information as possible, ideally offer registration at the moment of purchase rather than afterwards, to make it as seamless as possible.
Right. So just to round up then the discussion, thank you all very much. I just want to ask you all to maybe in just 30 seconds, if you just had to choose one thing that is the most important thing to get right when it comes to an effective product recall, what would it be? I mean, there are lots of elements we've talked about, but is there one thing that you think is really the kind of the killer blow, if you like, the thing that's going to really make a difference to improve product recalls? It probably will be something you've already said, but it's just really just to kind of give us a sense of your priorities. What would you say, Neville?
That's it's a very difficult question. It's like choosing your favourite friend or something. So,
Your favourite child.
I think favourite child. Yes. Look, I think what will make it successful is approach it earnestly and honestly from a business perspective, and think about really trying to get the product back. And if that's what the company sets out to do and invests effort into it, it'll flow through their communication and their channels and the way they make it open for consumers and easy for them to participate. Thanks.
Thank you. And Mathieu?
A complicated question, of course, and I will answer as a market surveillance authority and not as a consumer organization. But I think that if the companies have goal, what they want to achieve with the recall, and have a policy to do a recall properly, I guess it would help a lot for recall effectiveness.
Thank you. And Rasmus?
Yeah. I'm getting my 100% fulfillment rate either way, but if I have to choose, I would say transparency is very important, because if you explain what you're doing, people will understand you.
Yeah, 100% rate. You're the envy of everybody. And Anna, what would you say?
I would say, well, design recall campaigns with equal care as marketing campaigns. So try to reach your audience if the product was registered, if it was bought online, if it was bought using the loyalty card, contact the buyer directly. Design communication strategy as a marketing strategy and simplify the procedure. People will only respond to a recall if the benefits they see in taking action outweigh the perceived costs.
But of course, this is when I say I'm still asking questions here. But when you say about marketing campaigns, companies put huge amounts of money in their marketing campaigns. Are they going to be investing similar amounts in their potential recall campaigns? What do you think, Anna?
Yes, that's what I'm calling for.
That's what you're calling for. Okay. Well, anyway, we are running out of time, but thank you very much indeed. I mean, we've heard some really strong points about how we have to make product recalls simple, easy for people to actually to engage with. The beauty of the car industry is that products are registered and we've got that 100% recall. But the pictures matter, and this idea of investing as much as in a marketing campaign as in a recall campaign, really, really powerful. And there needs to be a much more personal approach to recalls. It can't be a generic sort of, there need to be direct channels that are used and make it hassle-free. And customers need to know where their data is being used. But I mean, as we saw from our Slido, the majority of people watching thinks that companies actually should be obliged to use their data for recalls in the interests of safety. So loads and loads of issues that have been brought up and which we're going to expand upon in our next session, where we're looking at some really good practices that have come in from different countries. But Oshie, do you have any last minute comments or thoughts that you want to add?
Yeah, thanks. What came up for me from the panel, that really companies should really think from the consumer's perspective, look at things a little bit from the consumer perspective. Consumers need to have clear messages. They need to have an easy process. They need to have direct communication as much as possible, so that they react. So I think it's super important that that companies keep this perspective, and we can see that it actually doesn't reduce the company's reputation, but it actually increases their reputation if they carry out a good recall. So really want to urge everybody to do this, and we are committed to further work on this in the future as well from the European Commission's perspective.
Thank you very much, Lida. I know you're going to be with us for our next panel, Oshie, as well, so giving us your insights. So we're going to have a little break now, 5 minutes or so. Keep an eye on the screen. I say 5 minutes or so because it's a little bit vague, but you can go and have a cup of tea, something to drink, and join us where we've really got some good stories to tell you. But I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Really great panel, some great thoughts, and thank you for your questions, and as well for you out there. And so join us in 5 or 10 minutes. I'm sorry to be so vague, but I'm not really sure how long it's going to be. See you soon anyway.